Hey Whiskey Ringers, welcome to a brand new intro. First off, there are still a few bottles of our single barrel rye finished in Armagnac casks, picked in partnership with This Is My Bourbon podcast. Check out the show notes for links to purchase. Second, I am thrilled to announce that I've joined the Bar Cart Co-op. This group of podcasts and shows has a show or multiple for everyone. I'll talk more about them in the mid-roll. Finally, there are still two $25 spots available on Patreon. These are the last two spots that will ever be open on that tier, so if you've been putting it off, grab your spot today. There are also spots available at the $15 a month level if you want to support but can't quite commit to that $25 tier just yet. There's a spot in supporting for everyone's budget, and I truly thank you all for making this podcast possible. Hey Whiskey Ringers, welcome to a special episode of the Whiskey Ring Podcast. Today we are on site at Long Island Spirits with
Rich Stabile.
There we go. I was going to ask my last name before recording, which I usually do, but I didn't. So Rich Stabile, who is the founder, head distiller at Long Island Spirits, Field and Sound Whiskey, Rough Rider Spirits, Long Island Vodka. There's a lot to discover at this distillery, but it being Long Island and me being a Long Island boy, I'm thrilled to be on site interviewing Rich. So Rich, welcome on.
Oh, thank you for having me. Really enjoy being here with you and look forward to chatting about our amazing spirits.
Awesome. So to start off, just set a little groundwork here. We're on the North Fork of Long Island. So we're in kind of what most people would think of as wine country now. A lot of wineries out here, about an hour and a half east of New York City. And really just beautiful country, mostly farmland as well. And surprisingly, though, not many distilleries. So, and you're not even a new distiller. You've been around since 2007.
Correct.
So, I guess my first question is, you started in 2007 making potato vodka to start off. What was that mindset like to start a distillery in 2007?
That's a great question. Today, there's an amazing infrastructure to support craft distillery world. Back then, we had to piggyback on breweries and wineries, dominantly wineries. And what was very interesting for us getting started was, just all the trial and error on everything, and how we got acclimated and started working with the farmers for potatoes. And then soon after opening, a lot of the wineries approached us and loved the fact that we'd be able to distill some of their extra wine into brandy. So that became a nice revenue stream for us, doing some private label brandies, which we continue to do to this day on a small scale. But really getting in touch, as you touched on, out here on the east end of Long Island, it's kind of a hidden gem. People, when I travel the country, aren't aware that they have a mental picture of suburban sprawl for Long Island. But it's very interesting when you hit an area called the Pine Barrens. It's a 110,000 acre watershed preserve, so the east end of Long Island has one of the purest water sources, ideally suited for making spirits, especially whiskey. There's no iron content. The waters are sourced from the Mahogany Aquifer, and we sit on the edge of that Pine Barren, the eastern edge of the Pine Barrens area. So it's really the start of the wine country, and really just agricultural North Fork. It's a step back into the 1600s. A lot of these farmers still retain the names that date back that far. So while we're one of the first legal distilleries since Prohibition, I bet you farmers have been distilling for quite some time back here with their XX grains.
I bet. And just to note, I know this history a little bit, but listeners may not, especially if they're not from the area, which is, it's notable that you started with potato vodka. So Long Island, like I said, the suburban sprawl is mainly around, I would argue, Nassau County and
Correct.
western edge of Suffolk County. But most of Suffolk County, center and east, is, like you said, farmland. And while we have wineries now, it was more potatoes.
100%. So at one point during World War II, there was about close to 100,000 acres of potatoes planted on Long Island. In fact, right up the street where there's a cidery there now, that used to be a Wise potato chip factory, which is kind of an interesting note. Well, they still grow a significant amount of potatoes out here on the east end of Long Island, a couple of thousand acres dedicated for growing potatoes. But they do rotate the crops. So the Long Island potato is pretty iconic. And we wanted to take advantage of using some of the notable Long Island agricultural products when we started, and that was where Live Vodka came from. It's really an abbreviation for Long Island Vodka. And so that was really our first step into the distilling world. We're very proud to still be producing that here, and we also do its brother that's corn-based. So we use local corn grain for making Live, which is our standard edition. We also still make the potato version.
And I'm just curious if you know this offhand, when that switch just in the area started from potato to more vine and even more suburban.
In the 70s, you're not making a fortune growing potatoes, but one of the great things about the east end of Long Island and what's helped create preservation is the open spaces provisions that Suffolk County was a national leader in that, in preserving open spaces. So they keep the farmers farming. They will buy up their development rights, which allows them, as long as they keep farming that land and not let it go back to, woodlands or anything. It's not the most economical place in the world to farm, but we're very happy to support our local farmers. That started in the 70s. It's kind of, every year, unfortunately, they continue to lose acreage of potatoes just because it's a lot more profitable to be growing grapes. And believe it or not, there's a lot of livestock out here. So there's a lot of the cover crops are grown of wheat, the winter wheat, winter rye, and of course field corn for one of our other notable livestock out here is the Long Island duck. So they do grow a lot of field corn for that and feeding a lot of the livestock here.
I do love my Long Island duck. It is.
Oh, yeah.
It's one of those things I just always love. So Long Island Spirits is also, being in 2007, it's one of the earliest distilleries, especially of the new wave. So you were the 100th distillery.
That's correct.
In the country. And I imagine you must have been only maybe second or third in New York State at that point, too.
Correct. Yep. We, the original, I remember going and meeting, up in Albany with the other craft distillers. I think there was like 4 or 5 of us in the room, back in like 2008 or 2009. And, my has how the industry has grown.
Yeah, we're now, New York State kind of goes back and forth with California for being first or second in terms of number of distilleries per state. So it's huge growth. I mean, I would think when you started, it was probably Tuttletown, because I think they were in 05.
Yeah. We actually started in 2000, putting everything together in 2006. We started producing January 5th of 2007.
All right, so just past the anniversary.
Yeah, yeah. So, it's been an amazing industry to watch the growth happen, and from where we were, 17 years ago. My goodness.
Yeah. It's weird. Yeah, I mean, talking back then, I wasn't even close to being able to drink alcohol at that point. But being the 100th distillery in the country, just in the single digits in New York State, if not, I'm going to look afterwards if I can find the number. I couldn't find it before the interview, but I was very curious about that too. It's the first craft distillery on Long Island too since the 1800s. And you alluded to this a little bit before, but there was distilling on Long Island before, pre-Prohibition, as there was in most places in the country, especially with a farming presence. But Prohibition kind of knocked it out here, just like everywhere else. And we had a fair amount of bootlegging, though, in the area.
100%. I actually have a still from back then. It's not put together or anything, but there was a gentleman who reached out to me and asked me if he wanted to buy it. They made it out of a milk, the old milk containers. They had the 5-gallon milk containers. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So he had built that. I guess his grandfather had built it, and it's a very unique piece. So we still have that around here. If I find it, I'll show it to you later. But it's pretty cool. It's got that patina. It's a little copper, but I'm sure if you fired it up, it would work. But pretty cool. Absolutely. So that was sitting in somebody's barn, I'm sure.
So when you started, and I promise we'll get to the products very soon. But
sure.
When you started with the potato vodka at first, how long did it take you to transition and decide you want to make whiskey as well?
We started making whiskeys about a year and a half later.
So not too long, really.
No, the vodka got us, helped us generate income. So did making brandy, and then we always wanted to make whiskey when we got started. That's why we selected the stills we did. That had always been within the plan, and we started laying down Rough Rider, and we had a very interesting joint venture with Blue Point Brewing back in 2009. Mark Burford reached out to me and said, who was a good friend, he had some barley wine that he had made a double batch of, asked if we were interested in distilling it and making it a single malt. So we were really at the forefront of making American single malt. So we laid that down back in 2009 as well, and about a year and a half released Pine Barrens because Blue Point Brewing sat at the other end of the Pine Barrens in the southwestern corner of the Pine Barrens area in Patchogue, and we were that partnership lasted until they got acquired by Anheuser-Busch. So we actually now brew beer in-house just to distill it, and that's kind of was the genesis of Pine Barrens.
And it's notable that the beer you're distilling, the beer you're brewing rather, is drinkable.
It's bottle-ready beer.
It's bottle-ready beer, yeah. Which, as we talked about on the podcast before, that's not always the case with distillers' beer. Sometimes it's god-awful.
Yeah.
With the expansion into whiskeys, you said building off of the breweries that were in the area, Blue Point, and then later partners as well. When you were moving into the whiskey, who did you kind of look to say, hey, we want to make some whiskey here, but I mean, there's nobody here in Long Island. It's not many in New York State at that time. So, but you seem to get good advice from somewhere. Where do you look to?
Right. So I'll be honest with you. A lot of it was trial and error. So we focus a lot on our fermentation. One of the things that we wanted to do different to set ourselves apart was, let's start out with the bourbon. We do all our whiskeys are sweet fermentation. We tried several different, so basically from the start. So we do with sweet fermentation. We tried several different yeast strains, settled on using Fermentus US 6W, which really gave us the best results. Secondly, doing our very tight heads, hearts, and tails cuts. So, pretty much just keeping about 60% of the spirit. Also, our barrel entry proof is 125. Other distilleries played around doing lower barrel entry proofs. And the other thing is we wanted to take advantage of the grains out here, and also our experience in brandy. So Rough Rider originally, and still to this day, is a mash bill of 60% corn, 33% rye, 7% malted barley. Then we do an extra maturation with that to round out the flavor profile in ex-brandy casks. So that kind of just gives it some nuanced touch to it. Our ryes, 93% rye, 7% malted barley. Rye is very terroir sensitive. The ryes that are grown on Long Island are going to be different than the ryes grown upstate or Midwest or Rhode Island or Maryland for that matter. So just because we're surrounded by a lot of the wineries here, the ryes tend to have a bit of a sweetness to them. And our Bull Moose Rye, we wanted to do something a little different there, so we did an extra barrel maturation. And then our Big Stick Rye, we just like to let that shine through at 121 proof and have that sort of develop its, people who like cask strength. There's really not that many cask strength ryes out there. So I think that became a showcase. So back to your original question, it was a lot of trial and error. That's the beauty of not doing gigantic batches of things. You get a sense of what things are going to mature like when you're trying the actual raw distillate prior to going into the barrel. And we were very, very happy with a lot of the results we have. And we even settled into establishing using Kelvin, Cooperidge's, Char 2 in all our whiskeys expressions.
Yeah, the Kelvin Char 2 was something that stood out to me for, a couple of reasons. One, usually, it's, generalizing for the industry, you're looking at a 3 or a 4 char, sometimes 3.5. Some of the heavy chars go 5, where the barrel's almost falling apart. But the Char 2, there's another distillery that we've talked to a couple of times, Spirits French Lick, who also uses Kelvin number 2 chars. And their reasoning, at least, I'm curious if it's the same as yours, is that you still get the char, you still get the toasting that you would get from a barrel, but because there's less filtration, there's less heaviness to the char, you let the grain shine through a lot more.
100%. 100%. Our distillates are fantastic because we do a sweet fermentation. We like to do a lot of the work up front and not rely on the barrel to produce as much flavor and have the grains really take note within the, during the aging process. So I think that's well put by them, and you would have probably gotten a very similar response to me.
Yeah, and it fits too with the timelines you were saying. I mean, we're overall in this episode, we're going to talk more about the Field and Sound line, which is kind of the not necessarily the newest expression, but the newest line extension, and really how you're getting more into more markets and getting across the country. But you mentioned that the Pine Barrens American Single Malt that you originally put out was a year and a half to 2 years old when it first went out. And at even a year or 2 years, you're not going to get a ton from the barrel like you would at 4, 6, 8 years old. So you have to have a lot of flavor in the grain.
100%.
Otherwise, you're just going to kind of have distillate not in a barrel for too long.
Exactly, 100%. So that was the essence of Pine Barrens, which was, if you'd like to lead into and start talking about Field and Sound, Rough Rider and Pine Barrens were kind of the building blocks for this new line we came out with, Field and Sound. The name comes from the field we back up to, which is about close to 100 acres of farmland that we grow. There's corn growing back there, potatoes, and winter rye is resting there right now. Then there's a tree line, and then you have the Long Island Sound, the bluffs of the Long Island Sound there. And that's really, we wanted to really speak to the terroir of Long Island for each one of these expressions. And the fact that we back up, we are in such close proximity to the Long Island Sound, you'll also get some salinity in the whiskeys. A very slight hint, but it is there. And, that comes from the ice cold winter breezes that shoot off the Long Island Sound. I mean, we have a deck off our tasting room here. Sometimes it's like being on the on board a ship, because you can actually feel some of the sea spray coming off there.
I bet it's and I should note, the day we're recording today, it's a pretty chilly day. We're in the 20s and teens right now. It's blustery, windy, but it's nice being out, and it's bright, sunny. So it's a typical winter day out on the East End, as we like to say. And with the sound being there and the salinity note, you mentioned on the website, and as you said here as well, that having a salinity or a maritime note in whiskeys is more associated with Scotland, and especially Islay and places on the coast. So, because that's just, what you get the winds coming off the West Coast, and you get that in there. In American whiskeys, though, it's pretty rare to be talking about that. I mean, the only distillery that I can think of that I've spoken to or visited and that has made that a point has been Ironclad in Virginia. And for the most part, it's a very kind of unusual flavor if you're not ready for it. As subtle as it may be, especially if you're not a Scotch drinker, if you're just drinking American whiskey, you're not going to necessarily notice it at first, or you might not like it, or you may love it.
Right.
But it's definitely going to be something different, to your point. It's going to have a little terroir of where we are. And how do you, we're also a couple feet from your tasting room. So I'm curious, when someone comes in and they kind of taste that salinity, or you're preparing them to taste that note in there, how do you explain it to them in a way that makes it be like, no, we want it to be in there and it's supposed to elevate the whiskey?
Well, I mean, the market speaks to itself. I mean, these are maritime whiskeys. Men's Journal rated our straight bourbon whiskey one of the top 10 whiskeys in the world. And we're quite proud of that. When we let the way we talk about it, it's not as upfront, the salinity, but when you mention it, then that they look for it and then they discover it. So it's whiskey, as you know, is a journey. And when your first taste, your second taste is going to be a lot different than your first taste. Your third taste is going to be a lot different than your second taste. So it evolves on the palate, and it's just wonderful to, when we're talking to whiskey enthusiasts, when they try it, and then they take a second try and a third try, let it open up, and the aromatics and splash of water, they just really enjoy that subtleness. And it's really something that we've seen a lot of delight in our whiskey lovers here.
Awesome. All right, so jumping into the expressions themselves, we're going to be trying a bunch of the field and sound expressions, which is now your major line of whiskeys. We do want to just mention that you still do carry the Rough Rider, the Bull Moose, and if those terms sound familiar to you listeners, might be associated with Teddy Roosevelt, who on Long Island we are quite proud of having Teddy around at the Sagamore site and many other places around the area. So with field and sound, we're starting off with Bottle and Bond straight bourbon whiskey.
Correct.
So cheers.
Cheers.
Very nice. This being my first drink of the day, it's a little hotter than usual, but that's first drink of the day. We were talking about as we walked through the production facility and barrel house that Rich and I both like cask strength or higher strength stuff, but this is the first one of the day, like you said, still catches you off guard sometimes. With the Field and Sound Bottled and Bond straight bourbon whiskey, obviously we're talking 4 years old minimum.
Yep.
Same sweet mash process, the 60-33-7 mash bill. So that's also something I want to pick out because that's an unusual mash bill.
Right.
Was that also just trial and error, figuring out what worked best with the grains you had?
Yeah. As I said, we varied. We were down to as much as 5% and we've been as much as 10% on the malted barley. We just found a happy medium at 7, and it just works for us. The size of our fermenters, or size of our mash tun, the whole. As I said, everything is a lot of trial and error, and we made a lot of mistakes in the beginning, and after 17 years, I kind of think we have it figured out.
It seems so, and I would give yourself credit even sooner than that, because these are already 4+ years old. So it was several years before that where you've locked in the flavor, you locked in the mash bills that you wanted to get. So with the bourbon, as you said, it's finished in previously used French oak casks, that held anything from Pinot Noir to Chardonnay grapes, Merlot grapes, brandy. Well, actually, I'll ask you: is it some wines, some brandy, all brandy cask?
So, obviously the Feel and Sound is just Kelvin Char 2. That's okay. for this one. But I think it might be better off when we get to our rum cask and brandy cask, to delve into our extra maturations.
Yeah, absolutely.
But for this one, we've gotten some great accolades with it. As I said, from Men's Journal and Vine Pair and some other. I can't say it enough how proud we are of this new whiskey line. So this was actually just released in 2021, December 2021. So this is really, we're up to batch 3 now.
Very nice. So the reason for my misstatement earlier that it was finished in the other barrels, I was thinking about the Rough Rider.
Yes, right. yes.
So that was what was happening. So there is a question or two I want to ask about that's still kind of relevant as we're going to the brandy cask, which was, because we have a lot of wineries out here, do you have consistent partners that you work with year over year? Or
yes.
All right. Do you also kind of rotate in as things are either available or depending on harvest and crops?
We only we prefer to just work with a couple. We've done Sparkling Point. That's primarily the one we've worked with. We've worked with some other wineries, but the one that we've been working with since like 2012, 2010, I think, has been Sparkling Point consistently. We did some stuff with Peconic Bay way back in the day, in like 2008. We did an unaged brandy spirit that was interesting. It was Sono Renata. We also learned which grapes give you really nice brandies, which aren't so great. We've experimented with Merlot, which is something we don't care for. So we primarily focus on Pinot Noir and Chardonnay grapes. So Sparkling Point's really the ideal partner because they do a lot of sparkling wines and produce a lot of Pinot Noir and Chardonnay.
And are they also the only ones, or one of the few, who you partner with to do brandy production? Like, do they use you for brandy production and do other places as well still?
Yeah, we just did a release for Sparkling Point a couple of months ago. We probably have about 15 of their barrels, and we'll make 2 brandy releases. Gilles Martin, who is one of the acclaimed wine producers out here, come and batch out what he thinks. He'll pick some from each barrel. We've got barrels that close to 10 years old out there, and they make fantastic brandies.
And you should say you have not only the brandy barrels that are that old, you also have some whiskey barrels. Or whiskey. I should say whiskey distillate at that point, because
yeah.
But you have some whiskeys in there that are that old as well.
Yeah. So we did a very, very small release of the Rough Rider called the Old Lion, which was our eight-year-old age statement whiskey. Whenever we produce our main lines, we like to hold back a couple of barrels. We're not a giant distillery, so we're never ever going to. Well, I should never say never ever, but we're not going to have these huge releases of very old whiskeys, but we do keep small expressions of very well aged whiskeys.
And I was lucky enough when I first came to visit Long Island Spirits, I got a bottle of the Old Lion.
Yes.
And I meant to bring it with me today, and I left it on my living room table, unfortunately, but it was really excellent stuff. 8-year-old bourbon, and said I'll put up my my tasting notes and such, and some information about it around the release of this episode.
Yeah, so the Old Lion, that was a single bottle, single cask at 126 proof.
It didn't drink at 126 proof. I mean, I'm trying to remember my notes off the top of my head, but I remember that it drank closer to about like a 105, 110,
right.
In a good way. Like, it was still very full-bodied. Even after 8 years in the cask, it still showed the original grain in a great way. Yeah. I can handle it well, but I still got to drive home.
Yeah,
so.
well, there's a lot.
Yeah, exactly.
It'll warm up the days.
Yeah. As we're pouring here, we've got some of the bottled New Bond Straight wheated bourbon whiskey, which, again, cheers.
Cheers.
Got the nice caramel note you get from more wheated bourbons, but it's still full-bodied, a lot of spice, and it's more. I would say it almost has a little coffee note in there too.
Coffee, you get a little bakery notes.
Yeah.
Yeah,
it's like a caramel latte from a
yeah.
kind of thing. Yeah, it's really nice. I like that. So the wheated bourbon has not always been in your portfolio.
No, we started making wheated bourbons about, I think, 2017. So we just there's a lot of winter at the time. There wasn't a lot of winter rye, so we're like, why don't we try making a wheated bourbon? And there is an abundance of wheat grown out here. It's grown for the same purposes as, but it's harvested in June. So that we typically work with the farmers to do our ryes in the June, July, August time frame. I mean, our wheated bourbons in that time frame. Even though wheat's available year round, it typically is all gone by September. So we try and purchase and do our production of the wheated then. So like June of 2017 is when we started laying down our first wheated bourbons, and we were just blown away with the distillate. And as I said, the barrels did their work, and these are we're very proud of these.
And with the wheated mash bill, are you swapping out the wheat for the rye?
It's a direct swap, so it's a very high wheat. I mean, if you look at other wheated bourbons out there, there's not a ton, and there's certainly not a ton of bottled and bond wheated bourbons, but the fact that we're able to get that flavor profile that starts out with that beautiful distillate. I think it's a result of the combination of our sweet mash fermentation and using the Christian Carl stills, which really allow you to do micromanage the whole distillation process. Taking our deep cuts rather than relying on the column to do all the work. We're very plugged into every drop of the whiskey that comes out.
And was the introduction of a wheated bourbon, I mean, of course, like you said, you've got wheat around, so it makes sense, just as you're doing with the rye and with the corn, and potatoes for that matter. But was there also, I'm just curious, any kind of market pressure from the local market, from customers coming in and saying, hey, do you have a weed? Because obviously the reason I'm asking in this time frame is 15, 16, 17 is when, when people started discovering kind of the Pappies and the Wellers and all of that. So the popularity of weeded bourbons went up quite a bit in that time frame. So I'm curious if there was market interference as well.
Well, it goes without saying, yeah. And one of the fortunate things, I've been a board member of the Long Island Farm Bureau, which part of the New York State Farm Bureau, since 2008, 2009. So, I'm keenly aware of the agricultural availabilities out here. So, I think I look to support the farmers in any way I can. And, certainly having a weeded bourbon in our portfolio has been a feather in our cap, I think.
I bet. I mean, it's a very good weeded bourbon. It's a great weeded bourbon, I would even say. And I know I'm a little bit biased because everything tastes better, number one, on the distillery. When you're at a distillery, everything tastes better. even some of the worst distillate I've found can taste really good if it's off the still kind of thing. But I really do believe, like, if I were giving this kind of independent review, that it would still rate favorably as something that has a lot of flavor, a lot of caramel, without being too one note, which I find a lot of either weeded bourbon or wheat whiskeys. They can really lean into that caramel note to a point
right.
where it's just like you feel like you just sucked on a Werther's candy,
right.
and that flavor's still kind of in your mouth. But no, with the coffee flavors, with the addition of a little bit of the kind of raw grain in a good way that's still there, for me, this would stand out against a couple of the other ones, and it seems like it has, as it's reaching the market. And with that, before we go to the next one, I wanted to just jump back to your production for a second. So as I said, we just did a tour of the production facility, and I got to see the fermentation, the beer. Words just went out of my head. I'm sorry. The beer vats, the stills themselves.
Right.
And as you mentioned, Christian Carl stills, 2 identical ones, 650 liters
Correct.
each. As I took a picture of them, so you can see this as we release the episode. But they're steam jacket, copper, 5 plates on the pot still, and then for other production like vodka, there are also column stills that can be attached or detached depending on the piping. With the Christian Carl stills, you mentioned earlier how versatile they are. And as I mentioned to you when we were touring, the Carl stills in particular seem to have caught on, particularly in craft distillers, because there's so much you can do with them on very short notice. Mm-hmm. I'm thinking of just other ones in the area, like Stout Ridge has Carls. There are a bunch of, just more and more craft distillers I talk to have Carl stills instead of the big guys like Vendome, Forsyths, things like that. And I think that speaks to the benefits of those stills. So were the stills that you have now the original stills that you...
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, so you've had those from the beginning.
Yeah, one of the owners, Alex, when we came, we're housed in a barn that it's a post and beam dual cupola barn that was built in 1910. So we had to work within the framework of the architecture here, and these stills were custom made to fit in the area on the main level, and we had to cut out some flooring for the columns to come through for the vodka portion of the stills. Those are the original stills. They get better with age, and I think that really contributes a lot to the flavor profile too. I mean, they shine up obviously if you polish them, but we like the patina on the outside, just because they look cool.
Yeah, it's got a little lived-in look to it.
That's it.
They've been used.
Yeah.
Worst thing you can have is, you're 5 years into distilling and you've got a perfectly clean still.
That's right.
What have you been doing on there?
Right.
At least on the outside. The inside, because you're doing the sweet mashing and such, I know you've got to have an extra level of cleanliness.
Oh, absolutely.
As it happens, we just interviewed Peerless Distilling in Kentucky, also doing a sweet mash. So we've had a couple of sweet mash distillers on here, and we know the sanitation requirements are a lot higher here. So with the production as well, before we even get the sweet mash, with the fermentation. So you're doing fermentation using the strain before, also champagne yeast and a brewer's yeast.
Yes.
So you're doing an exceptionally long fermentation with these.
So for our ryes, we use a champagne yeast. It's typically about 10 days. Our whiskey distillation will be 6 to 10 days. And then our single malt whiskeys, we actually use a brewer's yeast, and that's about a 3-week fermentation. We don't make a ton of our American single malts. I mean, we love them, but they're very costly to make, and we do them for 1 month. So we'll lay down maybe 15, 20 barrels a year, and that's it. We're not making a ton of American single malt, but what we make is just fantastic. We work within our framework of what we think it is working mostly in the market. For us, it's been bourbon lately. So, we're making a lot more bourbon and our wheated bourbons, and we still make a ton of rye as well. And but our single malt, we're always, we pick a month, typically in September timeframe, and that's when we do our American single malts.
I mean, just thinking about the fermentation times, normal kind of whiskey fermentation, we're looking maybe 3 to 5 days, something like that.
With a sour mash.
With a sour mash, right. Sweet mash, you can go a little bit longer,
right?
Because you don't have, you got to get started with that. You're not getting started with the back set. But even so, I mean, 6 to 10 days for the whiskey, the rye, 10 days, the single malt, 3 weeks is almost, I would say, rum levels of fermentation length.
Yeah. So, one of the beauties of our fermentation tanks, we use Prospero, and they're all temperature control. We have glycol chillers. So we maintain precision temperature for each one of the fermentations. So they all vary from, if we're doing the single malt, that's a 70-degree fermentation. While whiskey's probably 80 to 85, and then we're up to about 95 for our vodka. So, there's a whole variable doing the champagne yeast. That's about a 75 to 80-degree fermentation. It's a low, slow fermentation, but it reveals a lot of the grain notes. And, those kind of shine through. With rye, which we're going to jump into next, the farmers refer to winter rye is a cleansing grain. That being said, it is deep-rooted, so it picks up a lot of the terroir notes of the area. While it's picking up the terroir notes of the area, being surrounded by all these wineries, our ryes tend to have a little bit of a sweet profile. This is our bottled and bond Field and Sound rye, and cheers.
Cheers. Definitely a sweeter note, which is, if you were just looking at the mash bill, independent of anything else, you'd think 93% winter rye, 7% malted barley. You would expect
a ton of spice,
a ton of the herbaceousness, black pepper, but in profile, I would say it's almost closer to a not quite a Maryland style like the barely legal rye, but maybe something closer to like a 60-65% rye, where it's a rye. It's not so sweet that it's a bourbon or it tastes like a bourbon, but the rye grain still comes through so nicely.
Oh yeah.
When you were adding the rye to your portfolio, because you had the rye around, did you kind of expect that profile to come up, or was that a welcome surprise?
It was a welcome surprise. We we tasted it on the distillate, because when we were starting out, we visited a million different distilleries, and we always wanted to do something different. And going back to being starting out in 2007, we didn't take the vision of wanting to try and compete with Kentucky distilleries. We never could. So we wanted to carve out a niche for us, and that was really focusing on producing things from local terroir, and how do you amplify those grain notes, and that's really through sweet fermentation and using a lower barrel char. So that's really why our whiskeys are not going to ever taste like somebody else's whiskeys. Ours are very distinctive.
They are, and it's welcome, I think.
Yeah.
With the rye, I'm in my mind. I want to ask the next question, but I'm still stuck on those fermentations because the length of the fermentation and the temperature control. Again, I haven't really seen it before. So with the rye using the champagne yeast, I don't even know which question to ask first. Let's start with using the champagne yeast. Did you look at basically wineries using champagne yeast?
No. Well so Gilles, going back to our experience with the brandy, so Gilles suggested we try that. So, we talked to, because we were, again, we made a lot of mistakes, but we stumbled on a lot of cool things during those mistakes. And one of them was in discussions, we probably would have never done this if we weren't making brandy for some of the wineries. He suggested, hey, why don't you try fermenting using champagne yeast grains? And it was just a very happy discovery. And, we really liked the results from that.
And I'm just fascinated. I want to look into the science a little more on this with the longer fermentation and the lower temperature. Because normally we say 3 to 5 is a general rule because people are using distiller's yeast. Let's call it the most generalized profile. You have distiller's yeast, 3 to 5, maybe 100 degrees fermentation, still temperature control, but letting it be a higher temperature so it'll work faster.
Right. Because you're just trying to generate ethanol.
Exactly. You want yield over, not necessarily yield over quantity, or quality rather, but sometimes yield over quality.
Right.
But the long fermentation, you're getting more, towards the end of a normal fermentation, you'd start getting more of the fruity esters coming out, particularly if you go into day 6, day 7. But even at that time, the percentage of alcohol or ethanol in the solution in the mash is getting high enough to start killing off the yeast. So is the lower temperature controlling it to such an extent that the yeast are able to survive either in a higher alcohol environment or just there's less alcohol being produced as fast, so the yeast can live longer?
So it's less it's the same amount of alcohol, but depending on which strain we're using, it allows, as long as you're controlling the temperature, that is their sweet spot in their longevity of the yeast. Each yeast strain has their own parameters, and if we're propagating from sweet fermentation, allows us really to have much tighter control during the whole process. These are closed-top fermenters. They, in discussions, we had talked about the amount of cleanliness, and that's also going back to not just being, when we started, we had to take a lot of our inspiration from breweries and wineries. You can't really get cleaner than a brewery. They have to be sanitary. So that is part of our system's, daily operating procedures here. Everything's immaculate. And, we take great pride in that. And, those are the type of things that really are going to influence the end result of the spirit. And, prior to going into the barrel, then the barrel. So we like to do a lot of the work up front.
And I was going to say, it circles back to what you were saying before, but you want to put the best distillate into the barrel before it even touches the wood.
Right.
Something that tastes really good, that has a profile that it will only be enhanced over the course of the barreling, not overtaken by the barreling.
Right, and barrels can fix a lot of problems, as people sometimes are obsessed with age levels of whiskeys. If the distillate going in isn't delicious, what are you trying to fix? So,
it's a good point. It's well taken. Yeah.
Yeah. So, these are bottled in bond, and they're absolutely delicious. And they absolutely show what we want to show in the expression. They have that sweetness from the deep-rooted winter rye here. You get a little bit of the salinity, very subtle, but if you look for it, you're going to find it on your palate. And you are going to get that those spicy notes that you look for in a rye, but they're not. The spirit doesn't lead with that.
Right. I was going to say that I was looking for the salinity in the first three expressions we've tried: the bourbon, the wheated bourbon, and the rye, and it's not upfront. It's more hitting me kind of on the finish, the back of the tongue, and I would almost equate it to, salt in baking.
Yes.
You're not necessarily tasting a cookie and saying it's salty, but having the salt in there and also missing the salt in there, you notice. It's like a teaspoon of salt for a full batch of cookies. You notice when that little bit of salt is missing, and it elevates it. Also like espresso and chocolate. You don't necessarily taste the coffee, but it bolsters that chocolate flavor.
100%.
So with the rye, I think, and as we're transitioning from the rye into the single malt, I wanted to do a shout out, which was to Monique at Winebow, who is
Love Monique.
Yes.
Hey, Monique.
Friend of both of ours. And Winebow has really been instrumental in your growth and hitting a national profile.
We've been with Winebow since 2008. We're very proud of our relationship with Winebow, and we couldn't ask for a better partner. Monique had brought some real firepower to the spirits team when she joined. I think it's been 7 years now. She's just been amazing in elevating the whole entire spirits program. Jessica Partington, shout out to her as well, and Rich Driscoll, who really has been a very close friend of mine since we got started. He's one of the founders, well, not founder, but I think he was the number 2 employee at Winebow. So, the Winebow, I've grown up with, I've watched Winebow grow, and they're just one of the, if I would rate them as the top craft spirits supplier in the country.
And that holds out, and I am really thankful for them, not necessarily introducing us, because I got to know you from visiting first, but for reintroducing us and helping to make this happen. And this is fully charged. Anyway, we're back in now. It might have a little difference in the sound. I had a technical issue that I've never had before, so we're going to go with it. But still thrilled to still have Rich here. And we're moving on now to the American Single Malt Whiskey. So we got Field and Sound, Bottled and Bond, American Single Malt Whiskey. You're now on batch 2. This is at 50%, obviously Bottled and Bond. That was redundant, my bad. But it's such a different, just off the nose, I haven't even tasted it yet, just off the nose, it has a very kind of fruity grapiness to it.
Right.
I don't want to say almost brandy-ish.
Yeah, you're picking up a lot of it really reveals, because what's different here with our single malts, we don't just use one type of malted barley. We have a proprietary mash bill of several different malted barleys. We use Montreal, we use a couple of other ones that I prefer not to mention, but it's just a very interesting approach to making malted barley rather than, making an American single malt rather than using all 2-row malted barley and, just distilling it and then putting it in a barrel. This is a true craft beer. You'll get notes of the hops in there, and after aging for 4 years, it's got such a wonderful flavor profile. There are not a lot of bottled and bond American single malts out there, and We just thought it would be an amazing addition to the lineup here. So, here,
Yes,
cheers.
And I should note it evolves a lot too. So on the nose, I was getting more of the fruity flavors on here. On the palate, I would get what I almost would describe as meaty.
Yeah.
It's different, but I mean I can see it coming from the beer. There's the through line from the malt in, but it tastes like you're at a smokehouse kind of thing, without being very smoky.
Right. Yeah. A little bit of white tea. Just yeah. There's a lot of depth to this spirit. We just thought this was truly unique.
Yeah, it really is excellent. So you said we were not going to reveal the proprietary blend of barleys involved, but are you still keeping to the ethos of the barley is from the area as much as possible?
As much as possible. So there is some two-row that is available. The closest is actually in New York State. It's a little too to grow good malted barley. You have to be in a climate that's a lot drier than Long Island. It's just too much humidity to grow here. The Cornell Cooperative tried experimenting with four-row barley a while back, but nobody really had any success with it. So we do purchase some of the two-row that goes in here from New York State, but here we focus not so much on using grains from here just because they're not available, but using our proprietary blend of. You'll even find some, chocolate notes in there from the barley. So yeah, there's about 5 different malted barleys that go into here. So they're absolutely delicious, and it creates a very unique. As I said, the beer is absolutely delicious, and it's so good the distillate coming off the still. So yeah, this is a really fun whiskey.
It is. It's reminding me because I always try to think of comparisons, especially when I'm describing whiskeys to people. I want them to have a frame of reference, and with American single malt, because it's still fairly a new category, it's a little bit harder because it's not always as close to it's like Scotch or Irish single malt as we think about. But this has a lot of kind of Mortlock character to it, and that the heaviness of the spirit, the depth to it, that meatiness, which is it's a pretty unique note. Like there are a couple of notes that are like, okay, we find that you find brown sugar and caramel in almost every bourbon, but in a single malt, the flavor is different. I'm also getting more of the salinity across in this particular expression.
Yeah.
I'm curious if you get that too.
Yeah, I'm just tasting it now.
Yeah.
It'll lay out on your palate for a considerable time. It's also it lays out in your glass. I mean, I don't know if the legs.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's a solid medium legs. They hang on. They're kind of sloughing off into the legs, but that's.
Yeah.
I mean, they're slow. That means there's a lot of viscosity there. That's what we're looking for. A lot of viscosity, and you feel it on the palate. It comes across as more than just 100 proof in terms of the viscosity, but the heat is very much in check.
Yep.
Obviously, my palate's now a little acclimated after having a few pours, but even so, this doesn't taste hot at all. Certainly doesn't taste young at all. But you still get some of that malt character, and I think to your point about distilling it from the beer and you get some of the hops in there, that helps to identify it as a malt spirit. So you're hopping it to a certain level. Are you still measuring the IBUs that come off of it?
We were doing that with the Pine Barrens. This less so.
Okay.
Yeah. So it's it's not going to come. The Pine Barrens was a little more upfront with the hop flavor. Mm-hmm. This is a little more subtle, but you still have them. Still have it in the back end.
Yeah, it's there, and I love it. We've seen a couple of distillers in the U.S. try to make a hopped whiskey, and I'm not saying that this is. I wouldn't consider this to be called a hopped whiskey. They're saying it as part of the marketing,
right?
That it's a hopped whiskey. Haven't been so successful
Right.
necessarily. A little bit too much hop is not, and I'm someone who likes IPAs a hell of a lot more than stouts and such and porters. So I like it bitter when it comes to beer, but for me, this doesn't. You get a little bit of it, just a little bit,
Right.
and that little bit is just enough to add an extra complexity of flavor without distracting from the malt character. So that's what I'm getting from it, which I love. There is also something I'm noticing in the glass, which I need to look more into, and that is not every spirit when you put it into a glass leaves a residue, but this one does. And the only kind of major distiller that I think of that has this, Brown-Forman barrel proof products leave a residue, where others like BTAC or Buffalo Trace or Heaven Hill, they don't. And it's fascinating to me when they leave a residue, because to me that says there's more in the whiskey. And you guys have always done probably non-chill filtered.
100%, right.
So I was curious, why non-chill filter?
Well, you remove a lot of the flavors that we're looking for. If you're a major distiller and you're looking for consistency across each batch, we go out of our way to hand mark each batch. We do look for some level of consistency, but we realize, whiskey enthusiasts are always looking for, if you're a craft spirit whiskey drinker, you're looking for some unique properties in that spirit. And if you do chill filtering, that's going to pull a lot of the fusel oils and esters that are in the distillate out. And we're not looking to do that. We want that raw flavor profile that comes from doing all the upfront work, and then allowing that Kelvin chart to polish the spirit, give it some notes, and why diminish it after we've done a lot of the work up front, and then pull out what we see as quality, to produce just vanilla.
Yeah. No, you're right. The new American oak is going to produce vanilla, buttery, coconut.
Yeah.
And that's not to say that notes are bad, but it's also the notes that a lot of people kind of lean into and rely on to say that they have a good spirit or when the whiskey is ready. But instead, you're relying more on, okay, are we at a point where, of course, you want to make a bottle and bond, so it has to be at 4 years old. But beyond that age, you still want it to just be, okay, if the barrel's overtaking the whiskey, it's aged too much at that point. So with that, I think that's a good point to ask. So the field and sound range is, with I think one or two exceptions, of course, being the finished, because you can't have the finished bottled and bond, but they all start as bottled and bond. So what would have happened, just hypothetically, what would have happened if you're looking at these spirits, you're tasting them throughout the aging process, and you find, I think they're better at 3 years than at 4 years? Would you have, do you think you still would have gone to bottled and bond eventually, or would you have said, the 3 years is really the sweet spot? And this is purely hypothetical.
Well, one of the things, what happened was COVID. So in 2020, as I said, Field and Sound was launched in 2021. We didn't sell a lot of whiskey in 2020, so our whiskeys just started aging, and we directed all our efforts to make hand sanitizer. We lost a lot of customers in 2020 and 2021. A lot of our barrels to mature a little longer, and we discovered we really liked what each one of the expressions had developed into, and that was kind of the impetus for launching Field and Sound. We always were looking to do an elevated brand above Rough Rider. That was really the impetus, COVID, and it just we're thrilled at the results. We do still, Rough Rider is, we still produce that. That's a younger whiskey, but we that has its own targeted audience for cocktails and making a killer Manhattan. But if you want something neat or on the rock, one giant ice cube and freezing cold day like we got today, to take a little bit of that chill out, this is the lineup that is our go-to.
Understood. And with that, shall we?
Yeah.
Onto the finished collection.
Sure.
So these are whiskeys that also start out. They are the Bottled and Bond series of Field and Sound.
They're straight. Yeah. Well, they can't be bottled and bond because they're straight bourbon whiskeys.
Right. So
but they're at least 4 years prior to going into the finishing casks. So these will mature, and then what's very interesting is we had produced rum, about a little over 8 years ago. We had about 14 barrels of it, and never did a release on it, our own product. And we had always planned on it, but the market really for rum, and it's just it never became one of those things. So we just did that, and it's always just been sitting there, and it's fun when we take customers around and we pull some stuff out from the barrel, because the rum is absolutely delicious, but we only got 14 barrels of it. So what we decided to do was, what would happen if we pull the rum out and do an extra maturation of our straight bourbon whiskey in those 8-year-old rum casks. And this turned out to be what we got. So this is bottled at 120 proof, which is essentially cask strength. So here we go.
Cheers.
Cheers.
That's a very different rum character than I'm used to. It's good. It's has. I'm trying to decide what country that would kind of line up with, but it doesn't really. It's a very unique rye.
We made the rum here.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No.
Yeah.
I'm thinking, just for comparisons.
For references.
Yeah.
The other thing, your listeners may not be aware of that aren't from the area. Long Island, we've got very hot summers here and very cold winters. So, ideally suited for barrel aging products. And, this rum is, we'll try it a little later, not during the cast, but it's just a very unique product. It's not a released product, but the rum is just absolutely delicious. And, who knows, 10 years from now, we may just, do a select version of it.
Yeah, I know plenty of people who would be interested in, including myself, who would be interested in grabbing a barrel of that little in a bottle. So when you created the rum, as you said, we don't grow, I don't think, a ton of sugar products here on Long Island, but because the summers may be warm, but the winters, as we can see today, are fairly cold. But what kind of base did you use for the rum, and profile were you looking for?
So that's a great question. So we're one of the only distilleries that has 2 distillers licenses, because there was no farm distillery license when we started. So we have a Class A1 distillery license, which allows us to produce anything, and then we also have a farm distiller's license, which is where you have to only use New York State. So for our whiskey range and our vodkas and gins and everything else, that's all New York State. This is 50% pure cane sugar and 50% blackstrap molasses. One of the reasons why we stopped making rum was it took us like 4 days to clean the distillery after we made the molasses. Is like just,
it sticks to everything. And plus, if you're doing the sweet mash too, you've got.
Forget it. Yeah. So it's that's one of the main reasons we just stopped doing it. We thought it was a good idea. We use some bourbon barrels. We'll put some rum in it. And, after we made the, it was just like, forget it.
I mean, it's a fascinating profile. I don't think the bourbon gets lost underneath it, which is always important.
Right.
But in this case, because the rum profile is so different, I'm laser focused on the rum profile.
Yeah.
And the proof too. It's definitely warmer than the 100 proof. So it's leaning more towards the 120 where it is, but still it's not at 120 for me. It's still an easy drinker. Like I could see putting this on an ice cube or like a big ice cube. I want something that's going to melt slowly for it. But so you're doing a 50% pure cane juice and the
molasses
for the other 50%
blackstrap.
Blackstrap. Were you? I mean, you've said before with other products, you've done a trial and error process. Was there much trial and error with this, or just the one shot with that?
No, we used. Basically, we used our. It was almost like producing vodka. I mean, with rum, you want to accelerate. We took tight cuts on our heads and tails, but we didn't do. It wasn't like a fermentation where you're looking for, producing unique esters or anything else. Basically, our delicious rum casks added to the flavor of what the our bourbon casks added to what the flavor of the rum became. And then what's kind of cool is it's our bourbon that goes back into the same rum cask. So, it's been a lengthy journey for the whiskey in there.
Absolutely. And so you got 14 or so rum casks.
Yes. Yep.
Do you plan to? Well, this is a.
So what we do is a single barrel to single barrel swap out.
Okay.
So those bourbon. This was a general release for batch 1. We're doing a barrel program for our next release of Field and Sound, the rum cask, and so it's a barrel-to-barrel transfer. So we transfer the rum into a new bourbon cask, so it'll sit in there, and then we put the bourbon into that ex-rum cask, and that's what we're going to be using the rum for.
Nice. Love it. Well, I hope we do get to try the rum on its own, because it's like I can't get away from it. My mind is like stuck on it right now. It's like
it's cool.
It's like a record scratch kind of moment happening. It's so different. So with as we're moving on to our last pour, which is an about to be released, as of recording at least, about to be released product. Yeah,
it's a wheated bourbon that's finished in this, our ex French oak brandy casks. So the brandy is anywhere from probably similar 7 to 10 years old. As I said, we do a lot of brandy for Sparkling Point, so we have these casks around, and we decided to use them to finish a wheated bourbon in the ex brandy casks, and boy, oh boy, this is absolutely delicious. So here, cheers. Final note.
Yes. Lovely fruitiness. Again, the bourbon's not lost. It's definitely powering the pour.
Yeah.
But the brandy, though, coming from this is sorry, let's try that again. Is that a red grape brandy?
No. Or, this is Pinot Noir.
Pinot Noir, yeah. So like, red, but a light red.
Yes.
At that, for sure.
Yeah. So it's actually a 50-50 blend of Pinot Noir and Sparkling Point. So Chardonnay from Sparkling Point. So it's a very light,
Yeah.
It's almost like a rosé.
I was going to say, if you blend it, it's like it comes across that way too. It has that. It's red. You can tell there's the red with the berries in there and such, but it's lighter than a normal red would be.
So the colors of the labels are also an homage to what they were. So that's why, it almost has a wine color on the bottom strip of the label.
Mm. Oh, that is delicious.
Yeah.
This one I think is maybe a little bit closer to the 120. I'm not upset about that at all, for sure. This feels like, whereas the rum felt like a really good summer on a cube, this feels like a good winter on a cube.
100%.
Really good stuff. So just as we're we've gotten to taste through the Field and Sound lineup. As we're kind of closing out, I was curious about kind of where you're going with this. So
Right.
you've got kind of two profiles that I'm thinking about. One side is the small local distiller. You're got 650-ish barrels in the warehouse right now, which is not a ton. But at the same time, you've also got a national distributor who's able to get the product out into the market. So you're as a consumer, you're kind of positioning yourself as a niche producer with a high quality product rather than high quantity. And you've said yourself, never say never, but for now you want to stay as where you are, with the two 650-liter stills, aging at least the 4 years for at least a bottled and bond product.
Right.
So what does, the next 5 years look like as you're reaching this national profile and reaching more people? Yeah, what does that next 5 years look like for you?
Yeah, so, this year we're going to lay down probably about 300 barrels. So we're increasing our production, but we're laser focused on quality. We're not looking to become a mega brand. We're looking to, develop ourselves as a high-end craft producer that is well respected for everything that comes out of the distillery. Each one of our flavor profiles are very distinctive, and we want to become known for that. In terms of volume, being able to satisfy national demands. Sometimes it's okay if you run out. I mean, it's just the way it is, and we also price these at a price point where they're not out of touch with market demands either. I mean, these the bottle and bond sit around 50 on the shelf, and the cask strengths will be around 75. So they're competitively priced. I'm just taking a long-term approach to building the company and building the business, and I want to stay laser focused on quality, and it's just always been built into our DNA here.
And you're also fortunate in a sense that the whole business is not dependent on the whiskey, because Long Island Vodka, Liv Vodka is selling well. You've got the Sorbetto line, which I personally love, especially some of the flavors that you've got now, which supplement, and they help bring in while the whiskey is aging. Just
Right.
as much as it did when you first started, you still need something to help out.
Well, one of the big things that was kind of interesting too during COVID, we introduced the Liv Standard Vodka, and we also came out with Liv Gin. So Liv Gin is actually, it's a fully distilled gin, and those are being well served in cocktail programs throughout the city. The Smith Group, we are their well gin.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, Liv Gin. Tommy Tardy and Flatiron Room, our gin and vodka are Liv Standard and Liv Gin. So we are, that will always be kind of the flagship of the company, because it's a lot of people know us as Liv, but Field and Sound we are well known for. So this is like our graduate degree. We are very proud of these and wear these on the wall, but like you said, we do need to still make sure that we're have the ability to be in this for the long term, and producing world-class vodkas and gins is kind of really helping us bring it to the next level, if you will. We'll continue our smart growth with our whiskeys, and we really appreciate the customer feedback we get on these products. Field and Sound has just been an incredible journey for us. We're so happy with to be partnered with Winebow on these, and appreciate you coming out today. I wish we had some warmer weather for you.
I'm someone who likes the cold, so this is perfectly good for me.
Excellent.
I wanted to end on one question that brings us back to the 30,000-foot view of this. So you're established, you're one of the earliest distilleries in New York, you're building into a national audience. you've got the Field and Sound line that's building out. I'm curious in terms of other distilleries that are growing on Long Island. There are still relatively few, especially compared to what we would call upstate, which as Long Islanders, anything about Westchester is upstate for us. So I'm just curious to know if there's any desire or movement into kind of becoming a leader for Long Island distilleries and pushing for Long Island to be more represented.
Yeah, the difficulty on Long Island, as you know, is the cost structure of starting a business out here is quite a bit different than upstate New York.
Yep.
So that's been a lot of the challenges for a lot of the guys getting started out here. We continually work with our partners throughout the state, but it's a very agricultural driven business, and it's hard. The other thing is with COVID, unless you have distribution, it's very difficult to get it. And now distribution lines, the distributors are not opening up their portfolios as much, so it's very hard unless you've been established, to get distribution. So that's one of the biggest challenges for new distilleries out here on Long Island, distribution and just the cost of doing business.
It's true. It's in the housing market too. It's in everything. Long Island. It's
tough. They're not making any more Long Island, so it's
yeah. We've got what we had 10,000 years ago.
That's right.
That's all we've got left. So, with that, Rich, thank you so much for hosting me here at Long Island Spirits. If you're visiting Long Island, come out here, make the trip. It's worth it. Come out to Baiting Hollow. It's near Calverton, near Islip Airport. It's pretty straight drive from the LIE all the way
Exit 71.
Exit 71, just go north from there. Really easy drive. And again, it's worth the visit to really see what they're doing here, to taste the spirits, and to put Long Island on the map. So Rich, thank you again.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate you coming out, and it's been a pleasure.
Same here. Thank
Cheers,
you so much.
bud.
Cheers.
One more click.
Absolutely. Cheers.
Cheers.
Hey folks, thanks for listening to another episode of the Whiskey Ring Podcast. If you like what you hear, please go ahead and click that subscribe, follow, or like button. Leave a rating and review on your podcast app of choice, and let me know what you want to hear. You can reach out to me through the podcast apps or email me at david@whiskeymyweddingring.com with any suggestions or ideas for new show guests. You can also support the podcast at patreon.com/whiskeymyweddingring. That's whiskey with an E, for as little as $1 a month. $5 a month gets you access to bonus content, including our soon-to-resume Under the Influencer series, and $25 a month means you join the Barrel Share Club. Each month, Barrel Share Club members get to try products sent to me for review, bottles from my own collection, and sometimes bottles that I just pick up because they're fun or interesting. Right now, only 5 spots remain in the Barrel Share Club, so grab your place today. Finally, please follow on Instagram. You can follow me at Whiskey My Wedding Ring or at Whiskey Ring Podcast. You can follow me on Twitter at Whiskey Ring. You can follow on Facebook at Whiskey My Wedding Ring or join the Facebook group, the Whiskey Ringers group. And I hope to see you there. Cheers, thank you for the support, and see you next time.